If you think that in the global power game, only gold, oil, or rare earth elements have the muscle to shift the balance, then you might be overlooking one of the most dangerous cards in play, one that's even quieter than battles in the media or parliamentary chambers. That card is titanium, a metal that seems obscure at first glance, but may well become the final chokehold that brings the West to its knees in the race for technology, defense, and global supply chains. While the world continues to wrestle with sanctions, the semiconductor war, and escalating talk of decoupling between the US and China, a different concern is quietly becoming more pressing than ever in strategic hubs like Washington, Brussels, and Tokyo. What happens if China bans titanium exports, not with a dramatic decree, but with a simple statement like national security controls, just as it did with rare earths back in 2010? That alone could plunge the West into a silent crisis. Because without titanium, there will be no F-35 fighter jets taking off, no automated robots operating in factories, and no sturdy backbone to support the dream of tech autonomy that Western nations have been chasing for over a decade. The factories, labs, and assembly lines that have been quietly humming along now face an almost surreal reality. Their future hangs in the balance of one chemical element, number 22 on the periodic table, and China holds the key. The story of titanium isn't just about a material, it's about dependence, it's about a long chain of strategic missteps, and it's about consequences no one dares to face, until it's too late. But before we dive into a crisis scenario, we need to understand one thing clearly. What is it that makes a metal like titanium the center of an entire global tech confrontation? Titanium isn't a metal you come across in everyday life. You won't see it in your cutlery, it's not used to cast economy cars, and most people have never felt the weight of a pure titanium bar in their hands. Yet in the world of advanced technology, where every gram matters, where strength, durability, and extreme temperature resistance can mean the difference between success and failure, titanium is an irreplaceable star. It's stronger than steel, lighter than aluminum, more corrosion resistant than any other industrial metal, and crucially, it doesn't oxidize under high pressure or extreme heat. These properties have made titanium the silent backbone of some of the world's most cutting-edge industries: aerospace, defense, robotics, and high-tech medicine. In each F-35 fighter jet, the latest generation combat aircraft from the US, over 40% of the airframe's weight is made from titanium. Not because there are no other materials available, but because nothing else comes close. Likewise, every Boeing or Airbus civilian aircraft contains tons of titanium to ensure a build that is lightweight, durable, and capable of withstanding thousands of hours of continuous flight pressure. In the world of industrial robotics, from automotive assembly arms to food processing lines, titanium is used to reduce weight, increase precision, and improve energy efficiency. And in medicine, no other material is as biocompatible as titanium. It doesn't trigger rejection, doesn't rust, doesn't crack, making it the perfect choice for artificial joints, bone screws, and even dental implants. In an era where AI, automation, and smart manufacturing are becoming the bedrock of global power, titanium is more than just a metal. It's a foundation. Without it, everything collapses. But unfortunately, just as the world is waking up to titanium's growing importance, control over this material no longer lies in Western hands. From mining to high-purity refinement, nearly the entire global titanium value chain is now under China's control. And that, more than anything, is what's keeping Washington up at night. In the grand picture of global supply chains, titanium isn't just scarce. It's in the hands of players who aren't easily persuaded. China has long since outgrown its role as the world's factory and has become a game maker in its own right, wielding control over upstream resources as a form of soft power, quiet but razor sharp. When it comes to titanium, Beijing doesn't just hold a slice of production, it controls the entire value chain, from mining and refining to the export of high-purity products. According to the International Titanium Association, China currently accounts for about 35% of global raw titanium production. But it's not that number that worries the world. The real concern lies in the fact that China is one of the few countries with the industrial-scale technology to produce titanium sponge, the semi-pure form used in aerospace, defense, and medical applications, at competitive prices. This stage of production is notoriously difficult, requiring cutting-edge equipment, tightly controlled processes, and immense energy resources, things that most nations can't develop overnight. Baodi Group, the world's largest titanium producer, is based in China. Aerospace giants like Boeing, Lockheed Martin, and even robotics company ABB have at some point sourced titanium sponge from Chinese plants, or through peripheral partners in Russia and Kazakhstan that have Chinese stakes behind the scenes. Beyond that, Beijing has been quietly expanding its influence by acquiring titanium mines across Africa. In Mozambique, the Moma mine, one of the world's largest titanium sources, is now operated by a Chinese company, with over 90% of its output shipped directly to China. Likewise, in Kenya, South Africa, and parts of Tanzania, control has shifted to businesses tied to China's Belt and Road Initiative. This means that even if the West tries to diversify its supply, shifting focus to Africa or other emerging regions, they'll likely find themselves facing China again. A closed loop where buyers think they're acting independently, but are actually being steered by a player who's been strategizing decades ahead. And in this game of chess, if China decides to tighten supply, not with a full ban, but simply by citing national security to justify export controls, the fallout could begin within just a few months. At that point, the question will no longer be who controls the market, but rather, who collapses first. If one day China officially announces restrictions on titanium exports, even under the innocuous name of enhanced controls for national security interests, the first shockwave won't hit the financial markets. It'll come from the defense factories. The U.S. Department of Defense currently relies on imports for up to 85% of its titanium supply, the majority of which comes from China, Russia, and a small portion from Kazakhstan. This means that even a few months of supply chain disruption would immediately slash production of aircraft like the F-35. An internal Pentagon report once warned, if stable supply is lost, F-35 output could drop by up to 30% within just 2 years, a figure that's simply unacceptable amid escalating global tensions. Commercial aviation wouldn't be spared either. A Boeing 787 Dreamliner requires over 14 tons of titanium to complete its airframe and load-bearing interior components. If the material runs short, production of each aircraft could be delayed by years, not to mention a surge in manufacturing costs by billions of dollars and a ripple effect that could derail global delivery schedules. Airbus, despite efforts to shift sourcing toward Japan and Europe, still depends on China and Russia for up to 50% of its titanium. In other words, the path to self-sufficiency is still extremely narrow. Next in line would be the robotics industry, the heart of the West's reshoring dream. Companies like Boston Dynamics and ABB rely on titanium to keep their robots lightweight, precise, and energy efficient, key factors for competing with low-cost Chinese alternatives. Without titanium, robots become heavier, less efficient, and lose their competitive edge, which means the entire automation strategy for bringing manufacturing back to the US and Europe could collapse, all because of one missing metal. From defense to aviation to high-tech industries, the fate of all these sectors is now tied to a single element. But if the worst-case scenario unfolds, can the West find a viable substitute for titanium? Unfortunately, the answer offers little comfort, because the search for a titanium alternative to this day remains a journey steeped in frustration and failure. In closed-door meetings at the Pentagon, in Brussels, and at industrial forums in Tokyo, one question keeps resurfacing. If the West loses access to titanium from China, what material could replace it? But no matter how long the discussions last, the answer always circles back to a single point. There is no good alternative, at least not in the short term. Steel is too heavy. Aluminum is too soft. Carbon composites are light but brittle and can't handle high heat, not to mention they're expensive to produce and require extremely complex manufacturing processes. Emerging materials like advanced ceramics, reinforced polymers, or nanocompounds still live mostly in research labs or have extremely limited applications. And in fields like aerospace, defense, and robotics, there's no room for error or experimental failures. They need materials that are strong, light, heat-resistant, and corrosion-proof, and so far, only titanium checks all those boxes. Recycling isn't a silver bullet either. Currently, less than 5% of the world's titanium is recycled, and most of that doesn't meet the purity standards required for aerospace and defense. Recycling plants in the US and EU are largely still in the pre-commercial stage, and the process of purifying used titanium is both costly and slow. What about developing new domestic mines? In the US, titanium reserves in Utah and Colorado may hold promise, but securing permits and clearing environmental hurdles could take anywhere from 8 to 15 years, while a supply crisis could erupt in just a few months. Even when the West looks to Japan as a technological anchor, it can't escape China's shadow. Despite Japan's world-class metallurgical capabilities, it still relies heavily on raw ore imports from China and Russia to sustain its titanium production, which means even the most advanced nation in material science isn't truly self-sufficient. And when no one can easily replace it, when every attempt at domestic production is limited by time, cost, and capability, that's when China realizes it holds the final card. A card that goes far beyond natural resources and reaches into the very core of the next industrial revolution: robotics, AI, and global automation. While the world remains busy debating rare earths, lithium batteries, and semiconductors, China has quietly taken one step further, a long and deliberate step into the heart of future industry: robotics and automation. In its Made in China 2025 strategy, Beijing isn't just aiming to manufacture domestic robots. It wants to control the entire value chain, from raw materials and components to the software that drives them. And titanium, small, quiet, almost invisible, is the final piece China needs to complete that play. By holding most of the refined titanium supply, Beijing no longer has to compete on price. Instead, it can shape the rules of the game through dependency. If major robotics companies like ABB, KUKA, Boston Dynamics, or even Tesla can't secure a stable source of titanium, they'll be forced to make a choice: either compromise on product quality or shift production to where titanium is always available. In other words, China. And once robotic production lines are moved to China, what's lost isn't just manufacturing, it's technology, it's proprietary knowledge, it's massive amounts of production data, AI systems, and control software, intangible assets that are far more valuable than any supply contract. China has already done this with solar panels. It made the world's lithium battery and EV industries race to catch up. And now, if it tightens its grip on titanium, it could force the West's entire robotics sector to import not just raw material, but the future of innovation itself from Beijing. The striking part is, China doesn't need to act loudly. All it takes is a vague statement that titanium exports are being re-evaluated for national security reasons, and the market will react instantly. Prices could soar 30 to 50%. Western tech firms would be forced to delay orders, stockpiles would begin to run dry, and the global supply chain would spiral into panic. This would no longer be a conventional trade war. It would be a direct strike at the technological infrastructure of the entire world. A quiet strike. No bullets, no missiles, but one powerful enough to decide who owns the 21st century. Titanium, the 22nd element on the periodic table, once seemed like a footnote in the world of materials science. But today, it's emerging as the symbol of a silent yet fierce confrontation between two worlds. On one side, the West, driven by the desire for technological autonomy, supply chain security, and military superiority. On the other, China, quiet, calculated, and steadily tightening its grip on the critical links of the future: resources, materials, and industrial intelligence. The West's mistake wasn't in underestimating titanium, it was in believing that power lies only in the visible: armies, banks, or trade networks. Meanwhile, China chose to control what's less visible: foundational materials, production energy, and the ability to decide who gets access to advanced technology. And when titanium becomes a weapon, power no longer belongs to whoever has the deepest pockets, but to whoever controls the irreplaceable. The question is no longer, where do we buy titanium, but how do we keep from being held hostage by something so seemingly small? It's a question not just for governments, but for businesses, scientists, and every individual who cares about the future of the world. If you've been following this unfolding tech standoff where a single metal could tip the global balance of power, leave a comment below. Who do you think holds the key? China? The West? Or perhaps a neutral force waiting in the wings? And don't forget to subscribe to the channel to stay updated on the hottest developments in global economics, geopolitics, and the race for technological supremacy.